you come here as Bolivia as having been the only country to have opposed the outcome of Cancun.
Yes.
Publicly opposed the outcome of Cancun. Just firstly tell us why you did that and what are you expecting then out of this one?
Well, the problem in Cancun was that that outcome is going to burn the world and it's going to cook Africa. That is the main reason. Because the pledges of emission reductions that were made in Cancun are very low, are only 13 to 17% of the greenhouse gas emissions of 1990. So if this takes place during this decade until 2020, we'll see an increase in the temperature of more than 4 degrees Celsius. That's the average world temperature. If this happens, it means for Africa always the double. So if it increases 4 degrees, it will mean for Africa 8 degrees Celsius more as an average. So the impacts of this are going to be huge. Just to make it very clear, in the year 2010, 350,000 persons died because of natural disasters due to climate change. And the temperature has increased less than 1 degree Celsius. Can you imagine a world with an increase of 4 degrees Celsius? In the case of my country, Bolivia, we are a country of mountains. We have glaciers in our mountains. 1/3 of the snow in our mountains has already disappeared because of the increase in the temperature. If the temperature is going to increase in more than 4 times, then we are not going to have any more glaciers in our mountains. What is the consequence of that in relation to water, to agriculture, to biodiversity, to land? The consequences are terrible. So this is the key issue. We said it's not to save the multilateral process of negotiation. We don't want to have any kind of outcome. We want to have an outcome that really guarantees lives for everybody.
Again, I guess the question is, if the outcome, or if the consequences are as bad as you say there will be, why didn't the nations agree to that? Let's say the 193 nations agreed to the Cancun Declaration. Why do you think they were forced to do that, if they were?
There were two reasons. On one side, you have those that really don't want to make the cuts because they want to keep living as they have lived during the last centuries. And for what we would call the developed countries, the northern world, they want to keep going with their way of living. But their way of living is affecting us. On the other hand, in Cancun, there was the promise of finance, of money to developing, to the poorest countries. So many delegations at the end said, oh, you're right, because nobody can deny what we are saying. Those emission reductions are going to really increase the temperature for more than 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, and that's not what Bolivia says. That is what the IPCC, the UN is saying. The scientists are saying this. So they say, yeah, but that is going to happen, but at least we're going to get part of the fast start finance that was approved. Because a fast start finance was approved of $30 billion. That was going to be for 3 years, 2010, 2011, and 2012. The problem now here is that 2 years have passed and that money hasn't really appeared. So many delegations accepted a deal that was bad in terms of climate with the hope that they will receive at least certain finance that will help them to confront that situation. But in reality, that hasn't happened. So that is why this happened in Cancun.
That's a very interesting point you're making, because there's a lot of linkages between the accord and finance. I mean, let me just make reference to the Copenhagen Agreement, for instance, that when Bolivia disagreed with the Copenhagen Agreement, you lost some money. I think it was about $3 million US dollars?
Yes, we were penalized by the US. So
is that what happens every time you disagree with a...
Yeah, I mean, what kind of negotiation is this if you have to agree on something that the powerful countries want, and otherwise you're going to receive this kind of punishment?
So you were penalized?
Yeah,
By how much?
$3 million, and Ecuador was penalized by $2.5 million. But now, let me tell everybody that the U.S. just announced its Congress that's going to cut all aid for climate change to the rest of the world.
Whether you agree or not.
Yeah,
Whether you
because
agree with the,
there are internal financial problems. So, but you cannot sell your sovereignty, your right to live, for an aid of $3 or $5 million. That's not possible. I mean, we clearly said that after Copenhagen, and we called to a People's World Conference on Climate Change and Mother Earth Rights in Bolivia, that if we want to have an outcome, we need to respect the dignity and the equal rights of all nations without any kind of these pressures.
But let me come back again, because you say that the U.S. has then decided to cut the aid to countries all over the world simply because of their internal financial situation. But isn't that the point, though, that you can't set targets any higher than where they are, because ultimately they affect the economies of the world, the economies of countries?
Yeah, but you have to look at the other way around. If we keep like this, we are going to affect also the economies, but definitely, because it is unsustainable. You cannot keep growing. You cannot keep consuming like we are doing it. Because at one point, and that is what scientists are saying, we are going to break the system. I mean, if we all try to live the American way of life, we would need 8 planet Earths, because there are not enough resources to have everybody consuming the way they consume in the north. So we have to begin to think that the way development has been understood is not something that you can implement for all the world. I mean, if you speak only for 1%, 2% of the population, yes. But then you have to have the other 98, 99% of the population without the access to basic services like water, like food, like health, and so on.
But again, the argument is that the mitigating factors or the mitigation must be introduced progressively. In other words, you can't just come up with a 40% target that changes the lives of people almost immediately. What you need to do is to progressively then introduce those measures.
Of course, we would love to do that. But the issue of science is that if those deep cuts don't happen this decade, then you won't be able to come along the next decade. Because the emissions that you send this next 10 years into the atmosphere, you're not going to be able to remove them until 100 years. So everybody would love to do it progressively and have more time. But the issue is that what we have done has put us in a situation where if we don't act in a very strong way now, there won't be no possible solution, even if we want to do deep cuts in the coming next decade or half of the century. It will be too late. That is what science is telling us.
Sure. So what should then be the target for this conference, do you think?
From our point of view, one thing cannot accept is emission reductions from 13 to 17% of the levels of 1990. This has to increase. Developing countries are saying 40 to 50. Maybe it's not going to be that number, but at least it has to go. It has to be a higher number. What is not acceptable is that we remain with such a low number here in Durban, because we are going to lock it. So let's move as far as we can. But what we cannot accept is that is it. That is our situation here in the north. You have to accept it. We are not going to reduce.
But how do we do that? Do we do it through a completely new track? In other words, a new agreement of sorts, or we do it through Kyoto, or you don't care how we do it as long as we do it?
Well, the key thing is there has to be the political will to do it.
Yeah.
The form can change. Actually, from our point of view, inside the Kyoto Protocol, we can do it. All the nations are there except the U.S., and for the U.S. we can have a specific decision. So the best thing to do it is under the Kyoto Protocol. But if it's going to be done outside the Kyoto Protocol, the key issue is what is going to be the number. When I see the newspapers, I see that there is a discussion around something that is the form, secondary. It's going to be second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, or is it going to be a new legally binding agreement, a new roadmap for a new legally binding agreement for 2020? Yeah, because nobody's saying that is going to happen in this conference. Well, the key issue is, but what is going to be the number of emission reductions from rich countries? Because the consequences are going to be suffered by the poorest countries that didn't have to do, that are not responsible for the historical emissions that now have increased the temperature.